Stop biting your lip. You have no idea what it does to me. Elena froze. She was in the middle of a silent, high-stakes board meeting. And that text? It came from the billionaire CEO sitting 5 feet away. Everyone thought Alexander Vance was a heartless monster. But right now, he wasn't looking at the profit margins. He was staring directly at her mouth. One nervous habit, one secret text, and a hidden desire that was about to break every rule in the book. Now, before I tell you what happened when the doors finally closed, ask yourself, have you ever wanted to be the only weakness of a powerful man? Have you ever craved a love that consumes you completely? If the answer is yes, press that subscribe button right now. Don't just watch from the shadows like Elena. Join us. Because this story is about to prove that even the coldest hearts melt the fastest. Okay, let's go back to that moment. The silence, the tension, and the look in his eyes that changed everything. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, heavy enough to crush lungs. It was the kind of silence that usually preceded a natural disaster, or in the case of Vance Enterprises, the dismantling of a senior executive's career. The air conditioning hummed a low, sterile note, circulating air that was far too cold for the mid-July heat outside, but inside these glass walls, the temperature was always freezing. That was how Alexander Vance liked it. He claimed it kept minds sharp, but everyone knew it was just another way to keep them uncomfortable. Another subtle reminder that comfort was a luxury he did not dispense freely. At the head of the obsidian table sat Alexander himself. To call him handsome was a massive understatement that missed the point entirely. He was devastating. He possessed the kind of sharp, predatory beauty that made people stop breathing when he entered a room. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to an inch of its life, accentuating the breadth of his shoulders and the lean power of his frame. But it was his eyes, pale, icy blue, that held the room hostage. Currently, those eyes were fixed on Marcus, the vice president of marketing, who was trembling visibly as he tried to explain a 3% drop in the quarterly projections. Elena stood to Alexander's right, slightly behind his chair, merging into the shadows as she had trained herself to do for the past 2 years. She was his executive assistant, a title that felt insufficient for the amount of terror she absorbed on a daily basis. She held her tablet against her chest, her knuckles white, ready to record his next command or schedule the inevitable firing. She hated these meetings. She hated seeing the way he could reduce grown men to stuttering children with nothing more than a raised eyebrow or a whispered critique. It terrified her, and yet, watching him command the room with such effortless, lethal authority stirred a traitorous heat in her chest that she had spent 24 months trying to suppress. "You are telling me," Alexander said, his voice dangerously soft, "that you missed the projection because of a seasonal fluctuation? Is that the excuse you want to go on record with, Marcus?" Marcus swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet room. "Sir, the market trends were predictable." Alexander cut him off. He didn't shout. He never shouted. He simply dropped the word like a guillotine blade. The trends were predictable. Your incompetence, however, is becoming a liability. The tension in the room spiked. Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt a wave of second-hand anxiety for Marcus, even though he was incompetent. The atmosphere was suffocating, a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Without thinking, her defenses slipped. She reverted to the nervous habit she had fought since childhood. She caught her lower lip between her teeth and bit down, hard. It was a grounding mechanism, a way to use a sharp pinch of pain to keep her focus from spiraling into panic. She chewed on the soft skin, her gaze fixed on the floor, waiting for Alexander to deliver the final blow to Marcus's career. But the blow never came. Alexander stopped speaking mid-sentence. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was sudden, confused, and electric. Elena frowned, her eyes still on the floor. Why had he stopped? Had Marcus fainted? Slowly, dread pooling in her stomach, she lifted her head. Marcus wasn't the focus of the room anymore. Every head at the table had turned. They were looking at Alexander. And Alexander was looking at her. He had swiveled his chair slightly. His body was still rigid with the residual anger of the meeting, but his face had gone blank, his eyes dark and unreadable. He wasn't looking at her face, or her eyes, or the tablet she was clutching like a shield. He was staring, with an intensity that felt physical, directly at her mouth. Elena froze. Her heart stopped. Had she made a sound? Had she sighed? Why was the most powerful man in the city staring at her like he had never seen her before? She realized with a jolt of horror that she was still biting her lip. She released it instantly, her skin flushing a deep, mortifying crimson. The red mark on her lip pulsed where her teeth had been. The room held its breath. The executives exchanged nervous glances. Was this it? Was the assistant about to be fired for breathing too loudly? For distracting him? Alexander didn't blink. His gaze traced the curve of her lower lip where the blood was rushing back, his pupils blowing wide, swallowing the icy blue iris. It was a look of such raw, hungry intensity that Elena felt her knees weaken. It didn't look like anger. It looked like starvation. Then, a soft buzz against her hip broke the spell. Elena flinched. Her phone. It was in her pocket, set to silent, but the vibration felt like an earthquake in the quiet room. Panic clawed at her throat. Checking a personal phone during a board meeting was a firing offense. But Alexander didn't snap at her. He didn't look away. He just watched her, his expression tight, his jaw locked. With trembling fingers, Elena slid the phone out of her pocket, keeping it low, hidden below the edge of the table. She just wanted to turn it off to make sure it didn't buzz again. But the screen lit up with a notification. A text message. From boss. Her breath hitched. She looked up at him, confused. He was sitting 5 feet away. Why was he texting her? He hadn't touched his phone. Or had he? His hand was resting on the table, his phone face down beside it. She looked back at the screen, and the words burned themselves into her retinas. Stop biting your lip. You have no idea what it does to me. The world tilted on its axis. The air left the room. Elena stared at the screen, the words swimming before her eyes. What it does to me. The implication crashed into her with the force of a freight train. It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't an order to be professional. It was a confession. A dark, possessive, illicit confession sent from the head of the table to the woman standing in his shadow. She looked up, her eyes wide, shock written plainly on her face. She met his gaze. Alexander didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He looked furious, but not at Marcus. He looked furious at himself, his eyes blazing with a dark fire that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. He stood up abruptly, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor echoing like a gunshot. Meeting adjourned, he growled, his voice rougher than it had been moments ago. Get out of my sight, all of you. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the glass doors without looking back at her, his stride long and aggressive, as if he were running from a fire he had just started. Elena stood rooted to the spot, the phone burning in her hand, the taste of her own lips still fresh in her mouth, realizing that nothing in her safe, invisible world was ever going to be the same again. Elena sat at her desk outside the double oak doors of the CEO's office, her hands trembling so violently she had to press them flat against the cool mahogany surface just to steady them. The boardroom was empty now, the executives having scattered like frightened birds the moment Alexander dismissed them, but the echo of that meeting still rang in her ears. Or rather, the echo of the text message that was currently burning a hole through her blazer pocket. She pulled the phone out again. She had to. She needed to verify that she hadn't hallucinated the entire exchange due to sleep deprivation or a sudden psychotic break. But the words were still there, glowing with malicious, impossible clarity against the white background of her messages. Stop biting your lip. You have no idea what it does to me. It was insane. It was completely, utterly incompatible with the reality she had lived in for the past 2 years. Elena had been hired by Alexander Vance strictly for her efficiency. During her interview, he hadn't asked about her hobbies, her passions, or her 5-year plan. He had scanned her resume in 10 seconds, asked her if she was capable of organizing a schedule that would break a lesser human being, and when she said yes, he had hired her on the spot without once making eye contact. that had set the tone for their entire relationship. To Alexander Vance, Elena was not a woman. She was not even really a person. She was a function. She was the calendar app on his phone. She was the gatekeeper who kept unwanted visitors away. She was the coffee that appeared on his desk at 6 a.m. and the dry cleaning that vanished from his office at 8 p.m. She was furniture. Expensive, reliable, necessary furniture, but furniture nonetheless. He was the Ice King. That was what the junior staff called him behind his back, though never within a 3-mile radius of his office. He was cold, precise, and unyielding. In 2 years, he had never asked her how her weekend was. He had never complimented a dress. He had never smiled at her, not a real smile, anyway. He had a shark-like baring of teeth reserved for when he destroyed a competitor, but that was violence, not joy. He moved through the office like a glacier, carving through problems and people with equal indifference. And that was why Elena's secret was so pathetic. She was in love with him. It was a humiliating, cliché, painful reality that she kept buried deep beneath her professional demeanor. She loved the way his brow furrowed when he was reading a contract. She loved the rare, quiet moments late at night when he would loosen his tie and rub the back of his neck, looking human for just a split second. She loved his brilliance, the way his mind worked in complex, dazzling patterns that left everyone else playing catch-up. But she had made peace with the fact that it was hopeless. It was safe to love him because he never looked at her. She was invisible. It was a masochistic kind of safety, knowing that she could pine for him from 3 feet away and he would never, ever know. Because men like Alexander Vance didn't look at women like Elena. They dated supermodels, heiresses, or nobody at all. They didn't look at the assistant in the sensible heels who organized their tax returns. Until today. You have no idea what it does to me. The text implied he had been looking. It implied he had been watching her mouth, specifically. It implied that her nervous habit, something she considered a flaw, had a physical effect on him. The word tempting hadn't been in the text, but it was there in the subtext screaming at her. What it does to me. That wasn't an observation. That was a reaction. A visceral, carnal reaction. Elena shook her head, trying to clear the fog. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he meant to text someone else, but he had been looking right at her. And the context, "Stop biting your lip," was immediate. It couldn't be a prank. Alexander Vance didn't possess a sense of humor, and he certainly didn't joke during board meetings. It was real. The man she had spent 2 years thinking of as a statue made of ice and ambition had just cracked, and underneath, there was fire. A sharp beep from her computer drew her out of her spiral. The meeting minutes. They were processed and ready to be signed. It was a routine task. Usually, she would print them, walk into his office, place them on the corner of his desk, and leave without him acknowledging her presence. It took 30 seconds. Today, the prospect of walking through those doors felt like walking into a lion's den wearing a steak necklace. She delayed as long as she could. She straightened the papers. She checked the font. She adjusted her blouse, buttoning it up to the very top, feeling suddenly exposed. Her skin felt too tight, sensitive, as if his gaze had left a physical imprint on her. "Get a grip, Elena," she scolded herself. "He's your boss. You are his assistant. If you make this weird, you lose your job." She took a deep breath, grabbed the folder, and stood up. Her legs felt like jelly. She walked to the heavy oak doors, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Every step was a battle against the urge to run to the elevator and never come back. She knocked once, soft, professional, and didn't wait for an answer. That was the protocol. He hated being interrupted by noise. She was just supposed to slip in and out. She pushed the door open. The office was vast, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It smelled of expensive leather, old paper, and the faint, spicy scent of sandalwood that clung to him. Alexander was sitting behind his massive desk, his jacket discarded on the leather sofa, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He didn't look up. He was reading a document, his head bent, his dark hair falling slightly over his forehead. He looked exactly as he always did, absorbed, distant, and unapproachable. For a second, relief washed over Elena. Maybe he was going to pretend it never happened. Maybe they could just go back to the way things were, back to the safety of the cold. "The minutes for your signature, Mr. Vance," she said. Her voice was steady, thank God. He didn't respond. He didn't nod. He didn't even blink. Elena walked to the desk. She could feel the heat radiating from him, or maybe it was just her own feverish imagination. She placed the folder on the corner of the desk, right where she always did. "Is there anything else you need before I start on the merger files?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Silence. She waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. The silence stretched, becoming thick and suffocating. It wasn't the empty silence of before. It was heavy, charged with static. Alexander still didn't look at her. He refused to lift his eyes from the paper in front of him. But as Elena turned to leave, her gaze fell on his hand, the hand resting on the desktop, holding his fountain pen. His grip was so tight that his knuckles were stark white. The veins in his forearm were corded and straining against the skin, betraying a tension that terrified her. He wasn't reading. He was restraining himself. He was holding on to that pen like it was the only thing anchoring him to sanity. He knew she was there. He was hyper-aware of her. And he was refusing to look at her because he didn't trust what he would do if he did. "Leave the door open," he said suddenly. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. He still didn't look up. Elena paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Sir? Leave it open," he repeated, sharper this time. "The air, it's too thin in here." Elena swallowed hard. The air conditioning was set to 68 degrees, the same as always. But he was right. The air felt thin. It felt consumed. "Yes, Mr. Vance," she whispered. She walked out, leaving the door ajar, feeling the weight of his invisible stare burning into her back with every step she took away from him. The barrier was gone. The Ice King was melting, and Elena was terrified that she was going to drown in the flood. By 8 p.m., the Vance Enterprises building was a ghost town. The cleaning crews had already made their first rounds on the lower floors, their vacuum cleaners humming like distant insects. But up here on the executive level, there was only silence. The kind of profound, ringing silence that settles over a skyscraper when the city below begins to sparkle with nightlife. Normally, Elena would be home by now. She would be curled up on her sofa with a glass of cheap wine and a book, trying to forget the crushing pressure of her job. But tonight she was here, trapped. At 5:30 p.m., just as she was packing her bag, Alexander had emerged from his office. He hadn't looked at her directly, a trend he had maintained religiously since the boardroom incident, but he had dropped a stack of files on her desk that was thick enough to be a murder weapon. "The merger files are a mess," he had said, staring at a point over her left shoulder. "I need them reorganized, chronologically, then by asset value. Tonight." It was a lie. Elena knew it was a lie. She had organized those files herself 3 days ago. They were immaculate, color-coded, cross-referenced, and digitized. There was absolutely no logistical reason to reorganize them, let alone tonight. It was busy work. It was an excuse. But you didn't say no to Alexander Vance. So here she was, 3 hours later, sitting on the plush leather sofa in his office, files spread out across the coffee table like a chaotic paper ocean. Alexander was at his desk, purportedly working, but in the last hour, he hadn't typed a single word. The atmosphere in the room had shifted with the setting sun. The harsh fluorescent overheads were off, replaced by the warm, amber glow of the desk lamps and the glittering panorama of the city lights bleeding in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The darkness made the massive office feel smaller, intimate, dangerous. It felt less like a workspace and more like a private lounge, suspended in the sky, detached from the rules of the world below. Elena tried to focus on the documents, but her senses were attuned entirely to the man across the room. Alexander was restless. In 2 years, she had never seen him fidget. He was usually stillness personified, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Tonight, he was a caged animal. He stood up from his desk abruptly, the sudden movement making Elena jump. He walked to the window, staring out at the city, his back to her. Then he paced to the bookshelf, then back to the window. He reached up and loosened his tie, pulling the silk knot free and undoing the top button of his shirt. Elena stared. It was such a small gesture, but on Alexander, it felt scandalous. Seeing his collar unbuttoned, exposing the hollow of his throat, felt like seeing him naked. It was a crack in the armor, a sign that the legendary control was slipping. "Is the air conditioning broken?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. "It says 68 degrees, sir," Elena said quietly, not looking up from the file she was pretending to read. He scoffed, a dark, frustrated sound. He turned away from the window and began to pace again. As he walked past the sofa, he stopped. He was close. Too close. Elena could smell him. That intoxicating mix of expensive scotch, crisp paper, and sandalwood heat. She froze, her hand hovering over a spreadsheet. She looked up. She couldn't help it. He was watching her. He wasn't looking at the files. He wasn't checking her progress. He was just looking at her. His eyes were dark, shadowed by the low light, but the intensity was there, simmering just below the surface. He looked tired, but not the sleepy kind of tired. He looked exhausted from fighting something. "Take a picture, Elena," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "It lasts longer." Elena flushed, ducking her head immediately. I'm sorry, Mr. Vance." "Stop," he commanded. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms over his chest, his long legs stretching out. "Stop calling me that. It's after hours. There's no board here. No shareholders." Elena swallowed. "What should I call you?" "Alexander," he said. The name sounded heavy in the quiet room. "Or Xander. That's what my friends call me." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't think he had friends. "Okay, Alexander." The name felt strange on her tongue, forbidden and sweet. He watched her say it, his eyes tracking the movement of her lips. She resisted the urge to bite her lip, remembering his text. "Stop tempting me. Tell me something," he said suddenly, the casual tone of his voice at odds with the tension in his body. "Why are you still here?" Elena blinked. "Because you told me to reorganize the files." "No." He shook his head, looking impatient. "I mean in general. Why do you stay? I'm not an easy man to work for. I'm demanding. I'm cold. I've made 3 assistants cry this month alone. You've been here 2 years. You never complain. You never ask for a raise. You just stay." Elena looked down at her hands. "Because I'm in love with you," she thought. "Because even your bad days are better than days without you." "I like the work," she lied. "I like the challenge." He hummed, a skeptical sound. "Is that all?" He pushed off the desk and took a step toward her. He was standing right over her now. "Don't you have somewhere better to be on a Tuesday night? Someone waiting for you?" The question hung in the air, sharp and probing. It wasn't casual small talk. It was an interrogation disguised as a conversation. "Someone?" Elena repeated, her pulse quickening. "A boyfriend," Alexander clarified, his voice dropping an octave. "A partner. Someone who is currently wondering why you're stuck in a high-rise with your boss instead of coming home to him." He was looking at her with a predatory stillness now. He needed the answer. He needed to know if she belonged to someone else. The jealousy was preemptive, radiating off him in waves. Elena shook her head. "No. No boyfriend." The reaction was immediate. Alexander's shoulders dropped an inch. The tension that had been coiling in his frame released, just slightly. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. "Good," he muttered. The word was quiet, almost a growl, but in the silence of the office, it sounded like a shout. Good. He was glad she was alone. He was glad she had no one else. "Why is that good?" Elena asked, emboldened by the darkness and the strange, dreamlike quality of the night. Alexander looked at her, his eyes unreadable again. "Because," he said cryptically, "it simplifies things." He turned away abruptly, walking back to his desk as if he hadn't just pried into her personal life. He picked up the office phone. "You must be hungry," he said, his voice back to its usual commanding clip, though the edge was softer now. "I'm ordering food." We're not done here. I'm fine with whatever, Elena said, trying to steady her racing heart. I know, Alexander said. He dialed the number without looking it up. Spicy tuna rolls, no avocado. Miso soup, extra ginger. From that place on 5th Street. Elena stared at his back, stunned. That was her exact order. From her favorite obscure sushi place. She had never ordered food from the office. She had never told him what she liked. How? She started, her voice trailing off. Alexander glanced back at her over his shoulder, phone pressed to his ear. For the first time in 2 years, the corner of his mouth quivered. It wasn't a smile, exactly. It was a smirk. A knowing, arrogant, devastating smirk. I pay attention, Elena, he said softly. I pay attention to everything that matters. He turned back to the phone to place the order, leaving Elena sitting amidst the scattered files, her heart thundering against her ribs, realizing that while she thought she had been invisible for 2 years, Alexander Vance had been watching her the entire time. The strange, charged intimacy of the previous night evaporated the moment the sun rose. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the office was back to its usual frenetic rhythm. Phones were ringing, printers were churning, and Alexander Vance was once again the unapproachable titan of industry, sealed away in his glass fortress. Elena sat at her desk, feeling a distinct sense of emotional whiplash. Had she imagined the sushi? The question about her boyfriend? The way he had said her name? But the sushi containers in the trash were real, and the persistent, fluttering hope in her chest was unfortunately very real. The morning dragged on without incident until 11 a.m., when Julian arrived. Julian Thorne was the CEO of a tech startup Vance Enterprises was considering acquiring. He was everything Alexander was not: young, sunny, casually dressed in a designer t-shirt and blazer, and effortlessly charming. He didn't have an appointment until noon, but he had arrived an hour early. Just to soak in the vibes, as he put it. He leaned against Elena's desk, flashing a smile that had probably graced the cover of Forbes. 30 under 30. I have to say, Julian grinned, resting his chin on his hand. Alexander kept the best asset of this company hidden in the front office. You're Elena, right? The one who actually runs this place? Elena blushed, flustered by the unexpected warmth. I just managed the schedule, Mr. Thorne. Julian, please, he insisted, his eyes crinkling. And don't sell yourself short. I heard you reorganized the entire merger filing system in one night. That's wizardry. You should come work for me. We have beanbag chairs and an espresso bar. Much better lighting than this mausoleum. Elena laughed. It was a genuine sound, bubbling up before she could stop it. It felt good to be seen, to be joked with, and to be treated like a human woman instead of a piece of office equipment. I think I'm okay here, Julian, she smiled. Well, the offer stands. Julian winked. If you ever get tired of the Ice King, call me. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers where it rested on the mouse pad. It was a harmless, flirtatious gesture. Inside the glass office, 20 feet away, a pen snapped in half. Elena didn't hear it, but she felt the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. She looked up and saw him. Alexander was standing at the glass wall of his office. He wasn't working. He wasn't on a call. He was staring at Julian with a look of such profound, icy hatred that it was a miracle the glass didn't shatter. His jaw was set so hard a muscle was ticking visibly in his cheek. He looked like a predator deciding which artery to sever first. The door to his office flew open. He didn't walk out, he stormed out. The sound of his heavy footsteps silenced the entire floor. Mr. Thorne, Alexander's voice was a blade of ice, slicing through the warm banter. You're early. Julian straightened up, sensing the danger immediately. Alexander, good to see you. I was just chatting with your lovely. My assistant is working. Alexander cut him off, stepping between Julian and Elena's desk. He physically blocked Julian's view of her, shielding her with his broad back. It was a primal, territorial move. She is paid to manage my company, not to entertain bored children who don't know how to read a calendar. Julian's smile faltered. Whoa, easy. I was just being friendly. You were distracting her, Alexander snapped. And you were touching my equipment, Elena gasped softly. Equipment? Was that what she was? Alexander turned on Julian, his height and presence dwarfing the younger man. Your pitch meeting is cancelled. If you can't respect my time or my staff, I have no interest in your technology. Get out. Julian looked stunned. You're canceling a $50 million deal because I talked to your secretary? I'm canceling it because you annoy me, Alexander sneered. Security will escort you out. He didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel, grabbed Elena's arm, firmly, possessively, and pulled her up from her chair. Inside. No, he growled. He marched her into his office and slammed the door shut, locking it with a decisive click. He turned on her, pacing the length of the room like a tiger. What the hell was that? He demanded, wheeling around to face her. He was just being nice, Elena stammered, rubbing her arm where he had grabbed her. It didn't hurt, but the shock of his touch lingered. Nice? Alexander laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. He was drooling over you, Elena. He was trying to poach you. And you were letting him, laughing at his stupidity like he was charming. He was charming, Elena shot back, a spark of anger igniting in her chest. He treated me like a person. Unlike some people, he didn't treat me like a piece of furniture. Alexander stopped pacing. He looked at her, his eyes blazing. Is that what you think? You think I see you as furniture? You just called me equipment in front of the entire office, Elena cried, her voice trembling. The hurt welled up, hot and fast. You embarrassed him. You canceled the deal. And you dragged me in here to yell at me because I dared to smile at someone else. It's unprofessional, Alexander. It's irrational. I don't care about professionalism, Alexander roared, slamming his hand onto his desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I care that he was touching you. I care that you were looking at him with that light in your eyes. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked unhinged. He looked desperate. Elena stared at him, tears of frustration and confusion pricking at her eyes. She felt small and scolded, like a child who had misbehaved. The unfairness of it choked her. She didn't know what to do with the intensity of his anger, so she retreated to her only defense. She looked down, fighting the sob threatening to escape her throat, and she bit her lip. She bit it hard, trying to hold herself together. The silence that followed was instantaneous. Alexander's heavy breathing stopped. The raging energy in the room vanished, sucked into a vacuum of sudden, dark stillness. Elena kept her eyes on the floor, biting her lip, waiting for him to fire her. Then she heard his footsteps. Not the stomping, angry strides from before. These were slow, deliberate, predatory. He walked around the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing inches from her. She could see the toes of his polished shoes. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. Elena, he whispered. His voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of her boss. It was the voice of the man who had texted her in the boardroom. She looked up, startled by the tone. Alexander wasn't angry anymore. Or rather, the anger had transmuted into something else entirely. His eyes were dilated, black holes swallowing the blue. He was staring at her mouth, at her teeth sinking into her lip, with a look of pure, unadulterated hunger. I told you, he murmured, stepping closer, forcing her backward until her spine hit the cool glass of the window. I told you to stop doing that. He placed a hand on the glass beside her head, boxing her in. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, his breath ghosting over her cheek. You have no idea, he groaned, how much I want to be the one biting that lip. Elena was pinned. Behind her, the cool, solid glass of the window offered no escape. The city sprawled out 40 stories below, a dizzying grid of concrete and steel, oblivious to the storm raging inside the corner office. In front of her stood Alexander Vance, a different kind of dizzying force entirely. He was a wall of heat and tailored wool, his body caging hers, his presence overwhelming her senses. He wasn't touching her, not really. His hand was pressed against the glass beside her head, his arm a rigid bar blocking her exit. But the proximity felt like a touch. The air between them was charged, crackling with static electricity that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. She could smell the soap on his skin, see the faint stubble darkening his jaw, and hear the erratic rhythm of his breathing that matched her own. "Alexander," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She should push him away. She should remind him of HR policies, of propriety, and of the open door he had insisted on yesterday but had locked today. But her body wouldn't obey. Her heart was hammering a frantic, hopeful rhythm against her ribs. "I was jealous," he confessed. The words were gritty, torn from his throat like a confession he hated making. He stared down at her, his eyes dark and turbulent. "I saw him touching your hand, smiling at you with that easy, boyish charm I don't possess, and I wanted to tear the building down." Elena's eyes widened. Hearing him admit it out loud stripped away the last layer of professional pretense. You were jealous of Julian?" "I am jealous of anyone who gets to make you smile, Elena," he growled low in his throat. "I am jealous of the air you breathe. I am jealous of the sunlight that touches your skin. It's pathetic. It's madness. But I can't stop it." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against the glass just above her hair, his eyes level with hers. "That text message in the boardroom, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a prank. It was a warning." "A warning?" she asked, her breath itching. "A warning that my control is fraying," he murmured. "For 2 years I have kept my distance. I have been cold. I have been demanding. I have been a monster to work for, because I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you would leave. I thought if I was unbearable, I wouldn't have to bear the torture of wanting you every single day." Elena's heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. "You wanted me to leave? I wanted you to run," he corrected, his gaze dropping to her mouth again. "I am not a good man, Elena. I am selfish. I am arrogant. I ruin things. I consume people. You are light. You are soft and kind and brilliant, and you deserve someone like Julian. Someone who can take you to lunch and hold your hand without calculating the risk to your reputation." "I don't want Julian," Elena whispered, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "I never wanted Julian." Alexander's eyes snapped back to hers, burning with a sudden, fierce hope. "Don't say that," he warned, his voice rough. "Don't say that unless you mean it, because I am hanging by a thread here, Elena. One wrong word, 1 inch closer, and I am going to do something we can't undo." "I mean it," she said, her voice stronger this time. She looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath the armor for the first time. "I don't want to run, Alexander." He let out a shuddering breath, a sound of defeat and victory all at once. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he lifted his free hand. His fingers hovered near her face for a second, trembling slightly, before he made contact. His thumb brushed against her lower lip. The sensation was electric. A jolt of pure sensation shot straight down Elena's spine, curling her toes in her shoes. His skin was rough, warm, and calloused. He pressed gently, coaxing her lip free from where her teeth were still nervously clamping down on it. "Stop biting it," he whispered, his thumb tracing the swollen, reddened skin. "If anyone is going to bruise your mouth, Elena, let it be me." The words hung in the air, heavy with promise and sin. Elena stopped breathing. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. The world outside the window ceased to exist. There was only this, the heat of his body, the roughness of his thumb, and the scent of sandalwood and desire. He leaned in. She could feel his breath on her lips now. He was going to kiss her. Finally, after 2 years of silence and stolen glances, the Ice King was going to kiss her. She tilted her head back, parting her lips slightly in invitation. Re-eyeing. The shrill, piercing sound of a phone cut through the air like a serrated knife. It wasn't a text. It was the hardline desk phone, the red one. The priority line. The board. Alexander froze. His lips were millimeters from hers. For a split second, he didn't move. He stayed there, hovering, his eyes squeezed shut in frustration, a look of pure agony on his face. He looked like a man who had been offered water in a desert only to have the cup slapped from his hand. Re-eyeing. The sound was relentless, demanding. Reality was calling. The merger. The shareholders. the billion-dollar responsibilities that defined his existence. With a growl of pure rage, Alexander pulled back. The loss of his heat was instant and physical, leaving Elena shivering against the cold glass. He stepped away from her, running a hand down his face, wiping away the raw emotion as if physically erasing it. "I have to take this," he said. His voice was flat, dead. The vulnerability was gone, sealed away behind the iron walls of the CEO persona. He walked to his desk and snatched the receiver up, his back to her. "Vance speaking." Elena stood by the window, trembling, her lips still tingling from his touch. She felt bereft, exposed. He was already speaking in rapid-fire legalese, his tone sharp and commanding. He was the boss again. The moment was gone. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling foolish. He hadn't kissed her. He had almost kissed her, and then he had chosen the phone. Alexander didn't turn around. He didn't look at her. He just held up a hand, a dismissive gesture, signaling her to leave. "I need the file on the acquisition." He barked into the phone, ignoring her completely. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her hair, and walked to the door. She unlocked it with trembling fingers and slipped out, leaving him to his empire, wondering if she had just imagined the man who wanted to bruise her mouth, or if he was simply gone forever. But the tension in the boardroom was nothing compared to what would happen in Paris. When a hotel booking mistake forces them into one suite, Alexander makes a confession on the balcony that changes the rules forever. The flight to Paris was a blur of frantic preparation and high-altitude silence. Alexander had been brooding since the almost kiss in his office, burying himself in spreadsheets and curt emails. But when the exigencies of the merger demanded an immediate, in-person negotiation in France, he hadn't hesitated. He hadn't asked Marcus, the VP. He hadn't asked the legal team. He had simply looked at Elena and said, "Pack a bag. We leave in 3 hours." Now, 12 hours later, they were standing in the opulent foyer of the presidential suite at the Hotel Plaza Athénée. It was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapery, and a view of the Eiffel Tower that sparkled like a diamond brooch against the velvet night sky. It was also, apparently, the only room available. "There was a misunderstanding with the booking agency," Alexander said, hanging up the hotel phone. He didn't look displeased, but he didn't look pleased either. He looked resigned. "The summit has the entire hotel booked solid. This suite, it's all they have." Elena looked around the massive living space. "It's fine, Alexander. It has 2 bedrooms. It's bigger than my entire apartment complex. It's intimate," he corrected quietly. He was right. Despite the square footage, the suite felt enclosed. It was a shared space. A domestic space. There were no office dividers here, no glass walls. Just a shared living room, a shared balcony, and a shared coffee machine. "I'll take the guest room," Elena said quickly, grabbing her suitcase handle. "You take the master." He nodded, loosening his tie, that familiar, dangerous gesture. "Go get settled. We have a meeting with the French delegation at 8 a.m. Get some rest." Elena retreated to her room, her heart pounding. Being in a hotel room with Alexander Vance was a fantasy she had entertained only in her deepest, most private dreams. The reality was nerve-wracking. Every sound he made in the other room, the clink of a glass, the rustle of fabric, the heavy tread of his footsteps, felt amplified. She showered, trying to wash away the jet lag and the lingering tension of the last 48 hours. She didn't have pajamas suitable for bumping into her boss, just an oversized t-shirt, or a silk robe she had packed on a whim because it made her feel luxurious. She chose the robe. It was a deep emerald green, modest but fluid, clinging to her damp skin in a way that felt dangerously soft. She assumed he would be asleep. It was 2 a.m. local time. The suite was quiet. She stepped out of her bedroom, intending to grab a bottle of water from the minibar. But the living room wasn't empty. The balcony doors were open, letting in the cool Parisian breeze, and a silhouette was standing against the railing. Alexander. He had discarded his jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He held a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand, staring out at the glittering iron lady in the distance. He looked solitary. He looked like a king surveying a kingdom he didn't want. Elena hesitated. She should go back. She should hide. But the pull was too strong. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. Alexander didn't startle. He turned slowly, his eyes finding her in the dim light. His gaze swept over her, the damp hair curling around her face, the emerald silk, the bare feet against the plush carpet. He didn't hide his appreciation this time. He drank her in like the scotch in his glass. "Sleep implies a peace of mind I don't currently possess," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. He gestured to the view with his glass. "Beautiful, isn't it? The city of light. It's incredible," Elena said, walking closer. She stopped at the threshold of the balcony, keeping a safe distance. "Are you worried about the meeting tomorrow?" Alexander laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "The meeting? No. I can handle French. I can handle the numbers. That's easy. That's just mechanics." He took a sip of his drink, grimacing as it burned down his throat. "That's the rest of it. The legacy. My father built this company from a garage. My grandfather built the foundation before him. Every decision I make carries the weight of 3 generations of ghosts. If I fail, I don't just lose money. I erase history." He leaned his elbows on the railing, bowing his head. It was a confession of weakness he would never, ever make in a boardroom. "You won't fail," Elena said firmly. She stepped onto the balcony, moving to stand beside him. "You're brilliant, Alexander. I've watched you. You see angles other people miss. You care more than anyone else." He turned his head to look at her. "I care too much. That's the problem. I care until it hollows me out. It's lonely at the top, Elena. That's the cliché, isn't it? But God, it's true. It's a vacuum. No one tells you the truth. No one asks how you are. They just want things. They want approval, or money, or power. I don't want those things," Elena said quietly. Alexander studied her face, searching for deception and finding none. "I know. That's why you're dangerous." "Dangerous? Because you want me," he whispered. "You don't want the CEO. You don't want the Vance name. You just want this. The man standing on a balcony at 2 a.m. who can't sleep." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes. That's who I want." "Why?" he asked, genuinely baffled. "I'm difficult. I'm moody. I work 80 hours a week. Because you ordered me spicy tuna rolls." She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Because you noticed I bit my lip. Because you protect the people you care about, even when you're angry at them. You're not just a suit, Alexander. You're a good man who thinks he has to be a machine to survive." Alexander stared at her for a long moment. The wind ruffled his hair, softening the hard lines of his face. He set his glass down on the railing with a definitive clink. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, and anchoring. He pulled her a step closer until the silk of her robe brushed against his trousers. "We have a meeting in 6 hours, he murmured, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "I should tell you to go to bed. I should go to my room and lock the door. Is that what you want to do?" Elena whispered, her heart thundering in her ears. Alexander shook his head slowly. His eyes were dark, burning with a fire that eclipsed the lights of Paris. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a seductive rumble that vibrated through her bones. "I don't want to be the CEO tonight. I don't want to be Mr. Vance. And I definitely don't want to be your boss." He tugged her closer, eliminating the distance entirely, until she was pressed against the solid wall of his chest. "Tonight," he whispered against her hair, "I just want to be the man who finally gets to kiss you." The distance between them vanished not with a gentle drift, but with a collision. Alexander didn't just kiss her, he claimed her. One hand tangled into the damp hair at the nape of her neck, tipping her head back, while the other arm wrapped around her waist like a band of iron, pulling her flush against him. When his mouth finally crashed onto hers, it wasn't tentative. It was a starving man finally reaching a feast. It was possessive, desperate, and overwhelmed by 2 years of suppressed longing. He groaned low in his throat, a guttural sound of relief that vibrated against her lips, and Elena answered it with a soft whimper, her hands clutching at the crisp cotton of his shirt, bunching the fabric in her fists. He tasted expensive scotch and raw food. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, his tongue sweeping into her mouth with an arrogance that made her knees buckle. But even as he devoured her, there was a reverence to his touch. He wasn't rough. He was intense, yes, but he held her as if she were made of precious, fragile glass that he was terrified of shattering. "Elena!" he gasped, breaking the kiss for a fraction of a second just to breathe her name. "God, Elena!" He swept her up into his arms, carrying her effortlessly from the cool balcony into the warmth of the suite. He didn't take her to the bedroom. That felt too presumptive, too far. Instead, he sat on the plush velvet sofa and pulled her into his lap, settling her across his thighs so he could look at her. His hands were everywhere, stroking her back, cupping her face, tracing the line of her jaw. He looked at her with a kind of wonder that broke her heart. His eyes, usually so cold and guarded, were wide and unguarded, filled with a raw adoration that felt almost holy. "You have no idea," he whispered, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "You have no idea how many times I've imagined this. Sitting in meetings, listening to you talk about schedules, and all I could think about was what you would taste like. You ignored me," Elena whispered, leaning into his touch, feeling drunk on him. "You acted like you hated me." "I hated myself," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her forehead, then her temple, then the corner of her mouth. "I hated that I needed you. I hated that every time you walked into a room, the rest of the world went gray. You are the only bright thing in my life, Elena. The only color I see." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the softness of her lips. It was a worshipful kiss, a silent vow being written on her skin. He made her feel precious. He made her feel powerful. For a man who commanded billions, in this moment, he was entirely at her mercy. They stayed like that for hours, wrapped in each other on the sofa as the Parisian night deepened. They didn't go further than kissing and touching. The intimacy of the confession felt heavier, more significant than sex. He held her like he was trying to absorb her into his skin. "I'm going to fix this," he murmured later, his voice heavy with sleep as he held her close, her head resting on his chest. "When we get back, I'm going to change the rules. No more hiding. No more boss and assistant. I don't care what the board says. I don't care about the policy. I'm going to make you mine properly. You can't just change the rules, Alexander," Elena murmured sleepily, tracing the buttons on his shirt. "It's complicated. I'm the CEO," he said with a flash of his usual arrogance, but softened by a kiss to the top of her head. "I make the rules. And my rule is that I'm not letting you go. Ever." It was a promise. A beautiful, dangerous, intoxicating promise. And in the safety of the suite, high above the world, Elena believed him. She fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer and more loved than she had ever felt in her life. However, their secret bliss was about to be shattered. The morning after their first kiss, a scandal breaks on the news, and to save Elena, Alexander does something so cruel it almost breaks her spirit completely. But Paris was a bubble, and bubbles, by definition, are fragile. The morning sun didn't bring warmth, it brought a harsh, glaring reality. Elena woke up alone on the sofa, a blanket tucked carefully around her. The smell of coffee was in the air, but beneath it was a sharp tension that made her stomach turn. Alexander was standing by the window, fully dressed in a fresh suit. He was on the phone. His back was rigid, his posture radiating a cold fury that terrified her. "How did this happen?" he was saying, his voice a low, lethal hiss. "How did they get those documents?" Elena sat up, clutching the blanket. "Alexander?" He spun around. His face was pale, his eyes hard. The softness of the night before was gone, replaced by the mask of the crisis manager. "Turn on the TV," he said. Elena grabbed the remote and clicked on the news. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the International Business Channel made her blood run cold. Vance Enterprises scandal, insider trading allegations and leaked merger data. "Someone leaked the Paris negotiation details," Alexander said, his voice void of emotion. "Before we even had the meeting. The stock is plummeting. The board is calling for an emergency inquiry." Leaked? Elena gasped. But only we knew the details. Only the executive team. Exactly, Alexander said grimly. He looked at her, and for a split second, there was a flicker of pain in his eyes before he shut it down. They're saying it came from my office, from my personal files. Alexander, you don't think. It doesn't matter what I think, he cut her off. It matters what it looks like. And right now, it looks like my office is compromised. His phone rang again. He looked at it, then at her. Pack your bags, he said, his voice clipped and distant. We're leaving. Now. The jet is fueled. What about us? Elena asked, her voice trembling. What about last night? Alexander looked at her. He looked at her mouth, where he had kissed her hours ago. He looked at her hands, which he had held. Then he looked away, staring at the Eiffel Tower, which now looked like nothing more than cold steel. Last night didn't happen, he said. Forget it, Elena. For your own sake. Alexander, pack, he roared, the sudden volume making her flinch. We are in a war zone now. There is no room for this. He turned his back on her, answering his phone again, already barking orders to his legal team. The promise to fix everything evaporated in the harsh light of day. The bubble had popped, and they were falling straight back down to earth, separated by a chasm of scandal and silence. The flight back from Paris was a tomb. Alexander spent the entire 8 hours in the private cabin with the door shut, on conference calls with lawyers and crisis management firms. Elena sat in the main cabin, staring out at the clouds, the taste of his kiss turning to ash in her mouth. When they landed, the atmosphere at Vance Enterprises was toxic. The leak was bad. The stock price had taken a 12% hit in 24 hours. But worse than the financial damage were the rumors. A rival firm, undoubtedly the beneficiary of the leak, had started a whisper campaign. They weren't just attacking Alexander's business acumen, they were attacking his character. Stories about unprofessional conduct and inappropriate relationships within the executive suite began to circulate on gossip blogs and financial forums. They were vague, nameless accusations, but in the corporate world, perception was reality. If the board suspected Alexander was sleeping with his assistant while the company burned, they wouldn't just fire him. They would destroy him. And they would crucify Elena as the distraction that caused the fall of an empire. Alexander knew this. And because he was Alexander Vance, brilliant, ruthless, and tragically self-sacrificing, he made a decision. He decided to save her the only way he knew how, by destroying their connection so thoroughly that no one would ever suspect he loved her. The execution was brutal. 2 days after their return, Elena was in the main bullpen, coordinating the crisis response schedules. The office was buzzing with tension. Alexander stormed out of his office, holding a file folder. Miss Davis, he barked. He didn't use her first name. He hadn't used it since Paris. The entire floor went silent. Elena stood up, her heart lurching. Yes, Mr. Vance? He threw the file onto her desk. It slid across the surface and scattered papers onto the floor. It was a theatrical, aggressive gesture, one designed to be seen. This report is riddled with formatting errors, he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the elevator banks. I asked for Helvetica. This is Arial. Are you incapable of following simple instructions? Elena stared at him, stunned. It was a font difference that no human eye could detect without a magnifying glass. Sir, I don't want excuses, he cut her off, his eyes cold and dead. I want competence. If you cannot handle the basic administrative tasks of this office, perhaps you should look for employment elsewhere, somewhere where standards are lower. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a slap across the face. Her colleagues, people she had worked with for years, averted their eyes, embarrassed for her. I will fix it immediately, Elena whispered, fighting the tears stinging her eyes. See that you do, Alexander sneered. He turned on his heel and walked back into his office, slamming the door. Inside the glass walls, Elena saw him lean heavily against his desk, his head bowing for a split second before he straightened up. But she didn't see a man in pain. She saw a monster. She sat down, her hands shaking as she picked up the papers. The message was clear. Paris was a mistake. His confession was a lie born of exhaustion and proximity. He didn't love her. He barely tolerated her. He had used her for comfort when he was vulnerable, and now that the pressure was back on, she was just Miss Davis, the incompetent assistant. She felt cheap. She felt foolish. She felt like every cliché of the naive secretary falling for the boss, only to be discarded like a used wrapper. The pain was unbearable. It wasn't just the public scolding, it was the contrast. The man who had held her on a balcony in Paris and told her she was the only bright thing in his life was gone. In his place was this cruel stranger. She couldn't do it. She couldn't sit outside his door every day, enduring his cruelty, remembering his touch. It would kill her. Elena opened a blank document on her computer. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She felt numb, hollowed out by grief. She typed 2 paragraphs, short, professional, final, resignation letter. She printed it. She signed it with a steady hand. She checked Alexander's calendar. He was in a strategy meeting with the legal team in conference room B for the next hour. His office was empty. She walked to the heavy oak doors one last time. She entered the office that smelled of sandalwood and memories. She placed the envelope in the center of his pristine, obsidian desk. She took her ID badge off her lanyard and placed it on top of the letter. She didn't look back. She walked out of the office, down the hall, past the staring colleagues, and into the elevator. When the doors closed, sealing her off from the world of Alexander Vance, she finally let out a breath, feeling like she had just amputated her own heart to save her life. Elena thought it was over. She left her resignation letter on his desk and ran. But she didn't know that Alexander Vance was already chasing her. What happens at Grand Central Station isn't just a reunion. It's a public declaration of war against anyone who tries to keep them apart. Alexander returned to his office an hour later, his mind a labyrinth of legal strategies and damage control. The meeting had been grueling. The board was demanding a scapegoat, and he was running out of pawns to sacrifice to keep the king, and Elena, safe. He rubbed his temples, the headache that had started in Paris throbbing behind his eyes. He pushed open his office door, expecting to see Elena at her desk, had bent over her work, perhaps angry but still there. Her desk was empty. His stomach clenched. He walked into his office, scanning the room. The silence was wrong. It wasn't the silence of focus. It was the silence of absence. Then he saw it. The white envelope was sitting squarely in the center of his black desk. The ID badge rests on top of it like a tombstone. Alexander stopped breathing. He crossed the room in 2 strides, snatching the letter up. He ripped it open, his hands shaking, actually shaking. He read the words, but they blurred before his eyes. Effective immediately. Irreconcilable differences. Resignation. No, he whispered. The sound was raw, ripped from his chest. No, no, no. He had pushed her too far. He had calculated the risk, assumed she would withstand the storm, and assumed she knew him well enough to see the act for what it was. But he had underestimated her pride. He had underestimated her pain. He grabbed his phone. He dialed her number, straight to voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded his veins. It was a sensation Alexander Vance had not felt since he was a child. He was always in control. He always had a plan. But looking at that empty desk, at the badge she had worn for 2 years, he realized he had absolutely no plan for a life without her. He pulled up the company's security app. As the CEO, he had access to the GPS tracking on all company-issued devices. She hadn't left her phone. She had taken it. Locating asset, Elena Davis. The dot pulsed on the map. She wasn't at her apartment. She was moving, fast, heading south on the highway. Grand Central Station. She was leaving. She wasn't just quitting, she was running. Alexander didn't think. He didn't call his driver. He didn't grab his jacket. He ran. He sprinted out of his office, past the startled secretaries, past the gaping executives. He hit the elevator button, slamming it repeatedly. When it didn't come fast enough, he wrenched open the stairwell door and took the stairs, 2 at a time, descending 40 flights like a man possessed. He burst out into the lobby, startling the security guard, and sprinted into the street. He flagged a taxi, practically throwing himself into the back seat. Grand Central, he roared at the terrified driver. Double the fare if you'd get me there in 10 minutes. The ride was a blur of honking horns and Alexander's own terrifying internal monologue. Don't be late. Please, God, don't be late. He arrived at the station, throwing a wad of cash at the driver and sprinting into the main concourse. It was chaos, thousands of people, noise, and announcements. He stood in the center, scanning the crowd, his chest heaving, sweat trickling down his back. He looked nothing like the CEO of Vance Enterprises. He looked wild. He looked desperate. Then he saw her. She was standing near track 29, clutching a small suitcase, staring up at the departure board. She looked small, defeated. Elena! His voice carried over the din of the station. She froze. She turned slowly, her eyes widening as she saw him. He ran to her. He didn't stop until he was inches away, ignoring the people staring at the disheveled man in the expensive suit cornering a woman. You can't leave, he gasped, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was tight, desperate. Let me go, Alexander, Elena said, her voice shaking. She tried to pull away. I quit. You made it very clear you don't want me there. I lied, he shouted. The echo bounced off the high ceiling. I lied, Elena. I had to. She stopped struggling, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. You humiliated me. You treated me like garbage. I was trying to protect you, he pleaded, his voice cracking. The board, they're looking for blood. The rumors, they're saying I compromised the company for a woman. If they thought we were together, they would destroy you. They would drag your name through the mud to get to me. I had to make them believe we were nothing. I had to make them believe I hated you so they wouldn't see that I am completely, pitifully in love with you. Elena stared at him. The crowd around them seemed to fade away. What? I love you, Alexander said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I have loved you for 2 years. I loved you when you were biting your lip in the boardroom. I loved you in Paris. I loved you when I was yelling at you about fonts just to keep you safe. Do you love me? Elena whispered. I tried to save you by pushing you away, he said, stepping closer, framing her face with his hands. But I realized, I can't save myself if you're gone. I don't care about the board. I don't care about the company. Let them have it. Let them take the title. I don't want to be the CEO if it means I have to be without you. Tears spilled over Elena's cheeks. You'd give it up? The legacy? In a heartbeat, he swore. Watch me. I'll call them right now. He reached for his phone, fully intending to do it. Elena grabbed his hand, stopping him. No, she said, a small, watery smile breaking through. Don't be an idiot. We can fight them, but only if you stop treating me like a liability and start treating me like a partner. Alexander looked down at her, relief crashing over him like a tidal wave. He laughed, a breathless, incredulous sound. Partner, he agreed. Then his face grew serious. But not my secretary. I refuse to accept your resignation, Elena. You are fired. Excuse me? She frowned. He dropped to one knee. Right there on the dirty floor of Grand Central Station. A collective gasp went through the crowd of onlookers. I am firing you as my assistant, Alexander said, looking up at her with fierce devotion. Because the conflict of interest is about to become permanent. I don't want you to take my calls, Elena. I want you to take my name. He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Marry me, he said. Be my wife. Help me burn the board to the ground and build something new. Just don't get on that train. Elena looked down at the man who had terrified her for 2 years, now kneeling at her feet, offering her his empire and his heart. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Alexander. He stood up and kissed her, right there in front of New York City. It wasn't a cold kiss. It wasn't a secret kiss. It was a promise kept. And as he held her, Alexander Vance finally knew that the Ice King was dead, and he had never been happier to attend a funeral. 6 months later, the Vance Enterprises building looked exactly the same from the outside, a monolith of steel and glass piercing the sky. But inside, everything had changed. The scandal had been brutal but short-lived. With Elena by his side, not as a scapegoat, but as a publicly declared partner, Alexander had fought back. They had uncovered the source of the leak. Marcus, the anxious VP, had been bribed by a competitor, and had purged the board of the old guard who cared more about optics than integrity. The stock had not only recovered, it had soared. The market, it turned out, loved a redemption arc. They loved a power couple, and they were a power couple. Elena wasn't fetching coffee anymore. She sat in her own corner office 2 floors down, the director of the newly established Vance Foundation, managing millions of dollars in philanthropic grants. She had found her voice, her agency, and a wardrobe that was significantly more adventurous now that she wasn't trying to fade into the wallpaper. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Alexander was in his office, reviewing the quarterly reports. He looked tired. The furrow between his brows was deep, his tie was slightly askew, and he was rubbing his temples in that way that meant a migraine was brewing. The heavy oak doors opened. No knock. Alexander didn't look up immediately. "I told you, Janet, I don't want to be disturbed until 3. "Good thing I'm not Janet," a warm voice teased. Alexander's head snapped up. The tension in his shoulders instantly evaporated. Elena stood in the doorway, wearing a cream-colored dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She looked radiant. Confidence. Happy. "Elena," he breathed, a smile transforming his face. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes, the kind of smile only she ever saw. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Isn't the foundation meeting with the mayor today?" "Moved to Thursday," she said, closing the door behind her and locking it with a deliberate click. "I saw your schedule. You've been in back-to-back meetings since 7 a.m. I thought you might need a break." She walked over to his desk. She didn't stand on the other side like a subordinate. She walked right around it. Alexander pushed his chair back, swiveling to face her, his hands naturally reaching out to catch her waist as she stepped between his knees. "I always need a break if it involves you," he murmured, pulling her closer until she settled into his lap. It was a domestic scene in the heart of a corporate empire. She rested her arms around his neck, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck, hair that was a little longer now, a little less severe. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes and just breathing her in. The scent of sandalwood and her vanilla perfume mingled in the air. "You look stressed," she whispered, smoothing the worry line between his brows with her thumb. "Just the usual," he sighed, keeping his eyes closed, soaking up her touch. "People are incompetent. Numbers are stubborn. The world keeps turning. Poor tycoon," she teased gently. "Do you need me to reorganize your files? I hear I'm very good at that." Alexander laughed, a low rumble in his chest. He opened his eyes, pinning her with that familiar, intense blue gaze. "I think we're past files, Mrs. Vance." Mrs. Vance. The name still gave her a thrill. The ring on her finger, a stunning, vintage sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother, caught the light from the window. "True," she mused. She leaned back slightly, looking at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "But I do have other skills." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Uh-huh." Elena lowered her gaze to his mouth. Then, slowly, deliberately, she caught her lower lip between her teeth and bit down. She held his gaze as she did it, waiting. The reaction was instantaneous. Alexander froze. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the blue. His hands on her waist tightened, his grip turning possessive. A low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. "Elena," he warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Don't." She released her lip, smiling innocently. "Don't what?" "You know exactly what," he muttered, staring at her mouth with that same starving look he had worn in the boardroom 6 months ago. But this time, there was no fear. There was no coldness. There was only heat and the safety of knowing he was hers. "I remember you texting me once," she whispered, leaning in close. "Something about tempting you." Alexander groaned. He reached for the phone on his desk, his eyes never leaving hers. He jabbed a button. "Janet," he barked into the speakerphone. "Cancel my afternoon. All of it. Reschedule the investors." "Sir?" Janet's confused voice crackled through. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, Alexander said, his voice thick with desire. I just have a very urgent consultation with the director of the foundation. Do not disturb us. He hung up the phone and swept his arm across the desk, clearing a space among the papers. You are a menace, he growled, pulling her down for a kiss that tasted of forever. I learned from the best, she hummed against his lips, as they kissed in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the trappings of power but indifferent to them all. The truth was clear. Alexander Vance, the Ice King, hadn't melted. You can't melt a man like that. He had been conquered. He had been claimed. And in the circle of Elena's arms, beneath the weight of her love, he had finally found the one thing his billions couldn't buy. He had found home. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that even the coldest hearts can be conquered by love, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Like this video so more people can find their way to this happy ending. And subscribe if you want more stories that feel like a warm hug on a cold day. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your heart.